Hey, what's up, guys? Guardian here, coming to you guys with a deck profile. Finally, on my Majesty Lord Blaster deck for OverDress. Safe to say, I'm very excited to be profiling this deck. I was absolutely shocked at the beginning of this year when they announced Blaster Blade was returning. Um, we got Blaster Dark last year, and then the big shock was seeing Majesty Lord Blaster, The End, and PBO as well. The original trilogy of boss monsters from like season one of Vanguard from back in the day. Just like, yeah, it blew my mind if you saw my reaction to that. But yeah, I was super excited, and man, here we are. They are finally here in English, and I couldn't be happier right now. So, without blabbering on too long, let's get into the deck profile, shall we? So, to start off with the ride line, we of course have Wingle Brave has returned. The good boy himself got a foil version of him, which looks very cool. So, yeah, it's just your basic starter. However, he is important though because we are going to be riding into our Little Sage Merrin. So Merrin's skill says when this unit is rolled upon by a grade 2 with a blaster in its card name, look at the top 7 cards of your deck and choose up to one grade 2 with a blaster in its card name from among them, reveal it and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. But then if you did not reveal a card, you choose a Wingle Brave in your soul and you may call it to Rearguard Circle. So this is really good because now we actually just get a guaranteed +1, even if we don't see a blaster from the top 7, which is pretty cool, because now we can actually use that Wingle Brave as a rearguard now to make something like our Blaster Blade on the grade 2 turn is 16k attack, which is pretty good. And then also, Wingle is obviously a rearguard that we could retire for Blaster Dark skill as well, which is actually pretty handy. So yeah, Little Sage Merrin, really, really cool. It's glad to see this unit back as well. But, of course, we have the return of Blaster Blade. Yes. This is my favorite card. I know I'm a protagonist Andy here, but I can't help it. He was one of the main reasons to why I even got into Vanguard in the first place. Playing World of Warcraft in the past as a paladin, and then seeing that Vanguard had paladins in them. Yeah, I jumped onto the Blaster Blade bandwagon and pretty much followed Aichi's footsteps into Gold Paladin, but when he got Liberators with Blaster Blade Liberator, and then we had Seekers with Blaster Blade Seeker. G series, you had Blaster Blade Exceed. Yeah, I've stuck by this guy, and I'm so happy that he's back again in Overdress. I will gladly keep buying Blaster Blades because it just makes me happy, man. So yeah, his retrained version for the Overdress for D series, he's actually pretty good, and he's pretty remnants of his old version from like season 1. So when he's placed on the Vanguard circle, you counterblast 1 and then choose one of your opponent's rearguards and retire it. And then if you did not retire, you get to draw a card. So pretty good, I think. I know that people have been debating whether if Blade or Dark is the better one to go for, but I do think Blade is just the better Vanguard in general, because having just a spot retire for anything is just a lot better. And also, in order to get Dark skill off, you pretty much have to guarantee call the Wingle out and just not get anything from Merrin, so it's kind of a bit awkward. But Blade is just a lot more simple. You either get a retire or you just get to draw something if there's nothing to retire. So very, very good. And of course, he has a rearguard skill, but we'll get to that because I am playing some in the main deck as well. So I'll go over the rearguard skill a bit later. So we, of course, have the Majesty Lord Blaster, the end game of Aichi from season 1. Just centerize these a bit, and we'll spread them out a little bit just to give them a bit more of a spotlight here. But yeah, Majesty Lord Blaster. This guy, I couldn't be more happy with how they've redesigned him. He was pretty nuts when when he got retrained in the V series, but I think they've actually been quite subtle here, and they've actually been quite fair. Like, I think Majesty Lord is a pretty fair designed card. So first of all, his continuous skill is that if you have Blaster Blade and Blaster Dark in the soul, he gets a continuous 2000 power and +1 critical. So that is literally the exact same skill as the original version of Majesty Lord, which is insane to think that a decade old skill is still good now in like this revamped Overdress standard format, which is it's pretty funny. But he does have a second skill, which is when this unit attacks a Vanguard, perform all of the following. You can choose to perform only one. So you can do one or both, doesn't matter. Choose what you want to do. So you can put a Blaster Blade from your rear guard into your soul, and then choose one of your opponent's rear guards and retire it. Now this is actually pretty good because that means our Blaster Blades kind of become a miniature bod wipe in a way, but we'll get more to that in a bit. So that's what happens if you put Blaster Blade into the soul. But the more important one, in my opinion, is the second one, which is you put a Blasted Dark from your rear guard into the soul. This unit gets drive +1 until end of turn. Now this has some other synergies in the deck, which we'll get to shortly, but basically you're going to be attacking with like a Blasted Dark first, and then you're going to be putting that into the soul with Majesty Lord. So now you will have the Blade and the Darkened Soul for the continuous skill to get the 2k and the crit. So now Majesty Lord will become 15k, which is really good because now an 8k booster can now put Majesty Lord to a 23k baseline, which is a really solid magic number to be attacking with, especially with a crit on it as well. So 2 crit pressure every time you're attacking with Majesty Lord is really deadly, and that's kind of what he was known for back in the day as well. So yeah, I couldn't be happier with how they've designed Majesty Lord again. Super happy with this, and yeah, he is of course the bossian of the deck, and he looks really, really cool. And I love these like 10 anniversary stamps on these cards as well. They look really, really nice. So, to go into the actual main deck, we of course are playing the 3 additional copies of Majesty Lord Blaster, just because we do want to Persona Ride in this deck, just to get the extra power buff, but also so that our rear guards can then get over a defensive trigger with the extra power thresholds, and yeah, 3 extra copies. Persona Riding is good, so we're playing 3 more. Then we are playing 2 copies of the Order card, which is Bravery to Stand Against, Will to Pierce Through. This is the card on the playmat, so it's pretty good. So it's a grade 3 order, so you can only do it once you've ridden Majesty Lord, but the skill is that you play this with Counterblast 1, and you have to have a Blaster Vanguard. But you can search a deck for up to 1 grade 2 with Blaster in its card name, reveal it, then add it to your hand, shuffle the deck. So the purpose of this card is that it pretty much gives us 2 additional copies of our blasters, but more importantly, it makes it so that we can get to Blasted Dark a lot more consistently now, because the good thing is that since we have Blaster Blade in the ride line, we pretty much only need to worry about Blasted Dark. Now, we are playing 4 of it in the deck, don't worry. So this is basically an extra 2 copies of Blasted Dark, which I think is more than enough, because with the consistency elements of Merrin, checking the top 7 to add any grade 2 blaster, and then also you got Blaster Blade drawing you another card on the grade 2 turn, you're pretty good in terms of seeing at least 1 dark at some point. I've had a fair few games of this deck already, and I haven't yet had an issue with getting Blaster Dark. So yeah, I think 2 copies of this is fine. It's completely fine at 2. You can play 3 if you want to, but I think it's way too excessive to be playing 4 of this, so I do think 2 is the sweet spot for this card in terms of adding extra consistency to the deck. So yeah, 2 copies of that. Now, we have 1 more grade 3, and this grade 3 I think is just super cool in this deck. We have 3 copies of Colthes. Now, Colthes is a common that came out of set 2. And what it does is, when this card is revealed from your drive check, you may call this to an open rearguard circle. And if you do, it gets a boost until end of turn. The boost aspect of the card is not really relevant too much, but there's a couple of things that this card fixed when I was trying to design this deck, which is it actually enables us to do multi-attack now in the deck. We can actually do more than 3 attacks, because now we can now attack with our Blaster Dark, then attack with Majesty Lord, suck the Dark in, and then we get an extra drive check. So now that we have triple drive, we now have an extra line of consistency to actually see this card reliably. And then if we do see it, we can actually call it to the rearguard circle, and it says you may call it. So you don't have to call it if you don't want to, but this is actually more prevalent to do on your Persona Ride turns, because of course it's a 13k grade 3, so an extra 10k from the Persona Ride will make it 23 to get over a defensive. But the main line of thought here is that you're getting that 4th attack, and that's just something that we kind of need in this deck, because yeah, sure, 3 attacks is good, but 4 is better, obviously. But with that crit pressure from Majesty Lord, it's also quite likely for the opponent to try guard against that, or to try prevent it, because since we are playing crits, obviously, as well, taking 3 damage from the Vanguard attack is pretty scary, so that's that. So the Cold Thieves basically helps us enable to get a 4th attack, but there's also another element of the card that I love, which is it's very flexible in terms of being a good fodder card. So you can discard this card for your right deck if you do see them in your early game, which is actually really good, because if you draw this card, it doesn't particularly do too much, so you might as well discard them for your right deck, which is fine, which means you can hold on to other pieces, which are more important. But then also, you can actually use this as retire fodder for your Blasted Dark. Because one of the issues I noticed when making the deck was that I didn't want to retire anything for Blasted Dark skill, which was very unfortunate because I thought, well, there might be a scenario where I do want to pop something, and Blaster Blade can only retire grade 2s or greater. So if I want to retire a specific unit that Blaster Dark can get, but Blade can't, then I don't particularly want to retire. It's like, say, my Bedivere or K's or, anything else in the deck. Like, just any of the other cards in my deck were just important to keep, and I didn't want to get rid of them. But the Cold Thieves basically allows me to use this as another form of fodder for retiring for Blaster Dark skill, which is super, super cool, I think. And there is one more line of play with this card, which I think is really cool. It doesn't happen that often, but if it does, it's really funny. Which is, because you've got the triple drive from Majesty Lord, right? There are scenarios where you could end up calling this to the field, to the open rearguard circle that the blaster was on, and then if you then see the over trigger, this is a grade 3, which means you now get a twin drive extra during that turn. Now, don't get me wrong, it doesn't happen that often. Like, I had one game where it almost happened, but the drive checks weren't in the right order, basically, so kind of sucked. But yeah, I think it was a draw trigger. I ended up drawing into this instead of drive checking it, and then I got the over, which really sucked, but it was close. But when that does happen, it is so good. And yeah, I think this card's a really cool tech choice for the deck. But I did only want to play 3 of them just because I felt 4 was a bit too excessive. But the flexibility of it, I think, is really good. So I quite like this build with the Cold Thieves. So that is it for grade 3s. So we'll go into the grade 2s now. We are playing, of course, the 4 copies of Blaster Dark, since we do need him to go with Blaster Blade for the continuous skill of Majesty Lord. And yeah, like I said, the retire skill of it is actually quite usable in this deck. If you do see the spare copies of Cold Thieves that you end up drawing into, you can just retire those for Dark and get a spot removal. But also one element of this that is important is the 5k buff. The 5k on Blaster Dark making it 15 is very important, especially if you're going second, because being 10k on his own pretty much requires you to have a booster or some way to give him that 5k power, just so that you can attack your opponent's 13k base Vanguard, right? So yeah, it is important to bear that in mind, but yeah, we are playing the 4 Dark just because we do need it for Majesty Lord and getting those extra drive checks, so 4 Blaster Dark. Then we are playing the 3 additional copies of Blaster Blade, because, of course, I mean, here's the thing with Blaster Blade in the main deck. It's definitely good, and I do think you should be playing it, but I do think Dark is just more important in the main deck, just because we have the 4th Blade in the right deck. But, like I said, with Blade, I do think he's very good in terms of having that spot removal. The fact that you can place him on rear, counterblast, choose your opponent's grade 2 or greater, and retire it. That is good in the right scenario. Now, funnily enough, there are some decks that, like, they kind of clear their field a lot, so Blaster Blade's retire skill doesn't come up that often, but there are some elements of it that are still good. He's a grade 2 blaster, so you can actually add him to your hand with Merrin, which is still good. And there's also just another target for Majesty Lord put in to do that multi-attack combo that I told you about with Cold Thieves. So he has got a place in this deck, but I do think Blaster Dark's more important. But yeah, I am still playing the 3 additional copies of Blaster Blade. And then we have the return of the Loyal Knight himself, 4 copies of Knight of Loyalty, Bedivere. I'm so happy that they brought these guys back as well, because these were also used in the old school Majesty Lord deck back in the day. So Bedivere, major shout out to my friend Jamie, by the way, you know who you are. Yeah, Jamie ended up getting Bedivire's and K's, and it made it a lot easier for me to pick these up. So big shout out to you, my guy. So, Bedivere, he's pretty simple. When placed on rear from hand, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, so you'll know what he does on your turn 3 onwards, you can counterblast and soul blast to search your deck for a Knight of Friendship K, call to the rearguard circle, but it has to be in the same column as this card. So you can only call it in the columns of Bedivere, obviously. Now, there is a good thing about this, and the fact that you don't always have to use the cost of this card. If that K stays in the back row and just doesn't die, you can just call more Bedivires to that column to make good columns, right? So that's pretty cool. So you can actually dedicate your resources to other things if necessary. But the good thing with Majesty Lord is that the deck's not very resource intensive. I'd probably say your soul's the most clutch thing that you have to bear in mind, but counterblasts are fairly free for the most part, and you do have to you just have to keep track of what you're spending your resources on and at what time, and whether if it's relevant or not. Because like I say, your order is a counterblast, Blaster Blade's a counterblast, Blaster Dark's a counterblast, so you've got a plethora of choice in this deck when it comes to your counterblast, but you may only want to go for a specific one at a certain time, so just bear that in mind. So yeah, so 4 copies of Bedivere, and then going into the grade 1s, we of course have the 4 copies of Knight of Friendship K, the partner of Bedivere. So yeah, K, very simple skill. During the battle that it boosted your Bedivere, it gets 5k. So now it becomes a 23k column. So very, very good. Gets over defensive and just makes your rear guards just a little bit more tougher, a little bit more stronger to get over your opponent's defensives and just do more pressure. So very good attacker and just a very good column that you can make with the Bedivere and K. So we're playing 4 of them. And also, I don't mind playing the 4 Ks as well, because he is a booster, which means in the right scenario, if you have extra copies of him, you could call one behind your Majesty Lord just so you can make those 23k columns. So that is also worth knowing. So 4 copies of K there. And then we have, of course, the 4 copies of the Perfect Guard. Good news is that these are going to be getting a reprint apparently in set 6, so that's good. Since it has been a year since these got printed, so they stuck to the word with that. But yeah, for PGs, it's the good one in that you can just guard it on its own if you've got 1 or less cards. So very, very nice. So playing 4 copies of those, obviously, staple. And then the last grade 1 of the deck is going to be 3 copies of Painkiller Angel. Now, this is super cool because the one other thing I needed in this deck was more boosters for Majesty Lord. Like, K is fine, but I wanted a couple more just to reassure it. But Painkiller's super nice in the fact that we do have a couple of soul cards that we can get rid of and keep the Dark and Blade in. But because Angel draws us a card as well afterwards, it actually helps us dig through the deck to try see more copies of like Majesty Lord Blaster, for example, so that we can actually get Persona Rides off more consistently. Now, I know there's a promo coming out for Blasters, which is a grade 2, which also helps with that. But until that comes out, I think Painkiller is just the obvious choice at this point. And like I said, I do like the fact that it's another 8k booster to help with Majesty Lord's power. So yeah, 3 copies of her. Oh yeah, there's also one other element with her, which is very funny, is that because she actually retires herself for her cost to get the draw, it's actually an indirect way to actually trigger Blaster Dark's power skill to make him 15. Now, it is a little bit awkward because you do have to have an attack for Angel to boost to retire it to then make this get the power. So I'm not too sure how you would play around that. It's kind of awkward in terms of the timing, but it was an interaction that I did notice, but it hasn't come up too often. So yeah, just to bear that in mind. All right, and then for the triggers, of course, we have the over trigger with Amata Noah. Like I said, the really funny thing with this is the grade 3 of the Colthies and getting that twin drive. If that happens, I'm just going to be so happy and just laugh my head off. But yeah, of course, we're going to be playing it just because it's not too good in this deck like, in comparison to like Bastion, but it's still a good over trigger. It gives us pluses, it gives us more card advantage, and it's a way for us to just get into more pieces later on. So 1 copy of the over trigger. And then of course we are playing the 8 critical in the deck, the max copies with the 4 copies of the Gurgand, and then we are playing the 4 copies of the Feather Dragon from set 3. So yeah, sometimes the dragon can come up in terms of the soul, but not too often. But yeah, it's clutch, but yeah, you just want to play 8 crit basically, like do what you want with that. Because we do need to maximize on our pressure as much as possible with this deck. And with Majesty Lord being a crit as well, 3 crit to the face is pretty deadly. So with that, we also have the 3 draw trigger, just so we can see more pieces and dig through the deck. Pretty obvious, and it's a 10k shield as well, which is pretty nice. And for the heal trigger, I'm actually going with 4 copies of the new heal trigger with the Invigoration Sage. Now, I know that people are somewhat sticking with the 15k shield, the vanilla one, which is completely fine. But I'm mainly playing this just because with my locals at the minute, I know quite a few people that have Thegria, and in that deck there is at least some form of a restanding unit, right? Whether it's the Vanguard or the Rearguard. So this card's very very nice for this deck. Also against matchups where it's not too relevant, it's actually not too bad in Majesty Lord, just because with you being a 15k base, like let's say you didn't get the 2k, right? Let's say you were just a 13 and your opponent attacked you with a 23k column, right? Well, that would ask for a 15k shield, right? So in this scenario, where with you being a 15k base, you can actually guard those 23k attacks with a 10k shield because it still gets you to a value to block them. So that's actually pretty nice. So in those scenarios, the 10k shields aren't too detrimental, but like I said, I'm mainly playing this just because of my local environment, but these will obviously change depending on the state of the meta and stuff. So yeah, just bear that in mind. But it's really cool though, like being a 25k shield, if something's attacking for a second time is very, very handy. So pretty cool heal trigger. But yeah, that is basically it for the deck. So I'm very, very happy with this deck. I hope I went into it with as much detail as possible. And yeah, this video is a bit long, but I did want to go into as much detail as possible with this deck profile because, like I said, when I was trying to put it together, I was like scratching my head thinking, what if this, what if that, or that could work, this could work. And yeah, I hope this just serves as a good premise, a good template for people to look at and maybe see some lines that maybe they didn't see before and some tech choices that maybe didn't come up, like the Colthies, for example. But yeah, I'm super happy with this deck. Been playing it a lot recently, and I can see myself sticking with this for a very long time. But I will have a deck profile at some point in future for Phantom Blaster Overlord, and we do also have a deck profile coming up for Draconic Overlord at the end, which I'll probably do sometime next week. So yeah. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It's a long one, but hope you guys stuck around. I will have the deck log of the deck in the description below, so do click that if you just want a quick overview of the deck. But besides from that, that's going to do it for me. So, like always, I will catch you guys in the next video. This is Guardian 205, signing out.